And for those of you just joining us, I'm going to put the link to the sign-in form in the chat again. We'll do that a few more times, do a last call, and hopefully you'll sign in at least once.
I tried to put it on a couple of slides as far as the QR code goes, just covering anyone who came in late. All right, everyone. Well, we'll honor your time this afternoon. We're gonna move along. I am Laura Gabriel. I'm a literacy consultant here at Wayne Risa, and I am accompanied by Jason.
Hello, everyone. I'm an instructional technology consultant. I'll be handling all the back channel and moderating today.
And I really, as we get this next school year off the ground, I know probably a lot of you are already thinking ahead, planning. We wanted to kind of make a background theme to our entire Blitz opportunities this summer by really thinking about the whole child. The Michigan Continuous Improvement Plan is riveted on this idea that we're not going to push learning forward unless we're thinking about the whole child. And when we think about that, we think about that Maslow part. You know, we really can't do the Bloom stuff, as Alan Beck says, until we get at the Maslow stuff. So it's really kind of centering around those individual students in our classroom and their individual needs as we get ready to welcome them back to learning that will never look the way it did before. We've learned too much. We've grown in so many ways. A lot of positives have happened this year, despite some big obstacles, but we've got to take that and move forward with it. So we're going to think about fostering those really deep and strong relationships, how important those are to building that sense of belonging in our classrooms, and to think about that social emotional connection to their cognitive development. We really want to use that whole child thinking to accelerate their academic learning. So it's all kind of one piece of a big puzzle, but I think we all know as educators how important it is to simply know our kids and be able to address their needs individually as often as we can. It's a daunting task. We can't do it every minute, every day, but it's at the forefront of our thinking at all times. So we look at this with hope, and we think about making this our mindset, that we get at the physical and the social and the emotional, because we know it will promote the academic. And we have a wonderful person at Wayne Risa who is an excellent resource for social emotional learning. Her name is Cynthia Cook, and she's our school health consultant. So please feel free. Oh, thank you to Jason, just put her email into the chat, but feel free to reach out to her for additional information. And that leads us to today. Today, we're going to talk about inquiry-based writing. We're going to talk about choice and voice, how to scaffold that process, and how to present our findings or give our students opportunities to present their findings. One of the things I want to call your attention to, if you aren't familiar with them, is the suite of documents called the Literacy Essentials. The Literacy Essentials now span birth to grade 12. So if you go to literacyessentials.org, you'll find the entire suite of documents, and I can put that in there. That's one of the links I didn't add for Jason, but it's just a literacyessentials.org. And in that, you'll find birth to age 3, pre-K. You'll find K3, 4, 5, 6, 12. So essentials that span all of these different grade bands and ages. Additionally, you'll find coaching essentials. So those of you who are in a coaching role in your buildings or districts, there are 7 essential practices that accompany that role. And finally, you'll see school and center-wide practices for both the K-5 and the 6-12. And really what these essential practices do is just boil down to set 10 simple steps each day at the K-5. It goes more unit or, kind of module, however you term it, in 6-12. You can't do 10 practices every day in a classroom that only lasts for 45 minutes, but you want to think about how these connect together, obviously, to just give students some strong foundations in literacy instruction. So when you look through them, you'll find that they're nothing that's amazing to you. You won't think, oh my gosh, I never heard of this before. They're very common sense. And I'm going to walk us through a few. For our grades 4 or 5, we know that the first essential instructional practice is deliberate research-informed efforts to foster motivation and engagement within and across lessons. So we look for purposeful, meaningful purposes, for children to read and write beyond being assigned. So we want to open up that idea of inquiry. We want to think about how can they extend this learning to family, to community, to their interests. At the 6-12 level, we can see that it's all kind of rolled in, and this is true at 4-5 as well. We can see that by starting with something like problem-based instruction, we automatically roll in compelling reasons to read, compelling reasons to write, disciplinary reading skills, disciplinary writing skills, discussion, opportunities for speaking and listening, and community networking. And of course, the platform that kind of rolls underneath all of that is where we're going to take in some data. We're going to use ongoing opportunities for assessment, both formative and summative, to go back in and redirect some of those instructional practices. But I just wanted you to think about those as just a wonderful resource. And again, it's behind this concept of inquiry. 2, I want you to just think about that idea that when learning is designed in ways that prioritize our students' voices and thought, we give them a clear pathway. And this is, Jason has just put into the chat a link to Block's entire article. So feel free to access that at your convenience. But it's just thinking about opening up those opportunities for them to be the drivers in their own learning. And one of the things that in my own teaching experience that I learned is the more I moved to kind of the background, the more deeply engaged my students were. It took me a long time to get there. I still am in many ways a control freak. So I just had a hard time letting go of those reins. I wanted to give them the 5 topics they could write about. I wanted to think about what text they were going to use to build their understanding of those topics. And like I said, over time, the less I was involved in the process as far as dictating what happened within that process, the more I became a facilitator on the side, the more engaged my students were. So when we think about that idea of project-based, problem-based, inquiry-based, when you start to research, there are a lot of different terms that cover this kind of learning. It's kind of like peer review, it can be, peer feedback. You start to find that these terms aren't, there's not one term that encompasses all of it, but we want to give as many times as we can realistic problems that students can apply to the real world, give them that increased control, and kind of like that Peter Elbow concept. You're the coach, the cheerleader, the facilitator, and you facilitate their inquiry, but also their reflection. And as both Barron and Darling Hammond and others indicate, it's a great way to include some collaborative work, even if students are so independent that they've picked their own topics and are going about their research in their own way. They can still collaborate and learn from each other. Again, getting feedback from their peers, or giving some of their own background thinking to each other as they meet and move through pieces of that inquiry process. And then when it comes to the writing portion of it, what I want you to think about is offering students as much as possible those authentic purposes for writing, to engage them in opportunities to share with an actual audience. I want us today to think about text very broadly. So it doesn't always have to be a report or an essay or a research paper. We can let students display their findings in infographics or podcasts or videos, poster presentations, posters themselves, presentations themselves, and really look for ways that we can engage them in developing the question that they're going to research, and help them search for the answers. And again, that can be through text, obviously, it can be through discussion, it can be through primary research, it can be through secondary research, and a lot of this depends on the grade level, and the accessibility of different tools. But I think no matter what, if you're teaching from fourth grade up to 12th grade, a lot of this can easily be ratcheted up or down according to the age group that you're working with. Choice. Students can have choice in any aspect of that writing process, or we can embed that. So we can give them choice over the topic, the project presentation, or the genre in which they'll report in. We can give them choice about feedback. Sometimes students want a fellow student or even us as their teacher to dig deeply, to give them, very targeted and direct feedback, where other students might be, tell me what my strengths are, not necessarily my weaknesses. I want to work with the strengths. We can give them choices on research methods. We can also develop voice in a lot of different ways. The writing stylistic choices that they make, like their tone, the way they organize their information, sentence structure, word choice, whether they embed figurative language, all of these allow them to make those stylistic choices. And of course, if you're at the high school level, even thinking about rhetorical choices, how are they putting that argument together? Are they appealing to emotion? Are they using logic? Are they building their credibility in some way? And where are those overlapping? So what I thought I would ask you, we have a small group today. What are some of the ways that you encourage both choice and voice in your classrooms? And you can share in the chat or unmute and share, whatever is more comfortable for you. Someone sounds like they're unmuting, but I can't. We've got some stuff coming in the chat. All right. Yeah, definitely choice boards. What a great way. And if you haven't fallen in love with some of the slide templates like Slides Mania or Slides Go or Slides Carnival, they have a lot of choice board templates. So you can even use those as a way that students can kind of self-pace through some choice boards. Diary entries, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I love too the idea that that taps into that social emotional as well, because often journal writing, even though it might be directed towards content, can allow students to emote. And I do think it's a last topic. Yeah, so a larger topic kind of area and then some specifics within it gives them choice. Oh, I like that idea of the passion project. And delivery, yes. What about voice? How are you encouraging students' voice? Yeah. I like that idea too about that stars or wishes. That's that choice over feedback. I don't know if I linked it or not, but I created a little, if I didn't, I'll find it and get it to you before the end of this, but I tried to create a little menu on feedback choices. Yeah, actually, I think it's linked later in this, this presentation. So just that students would be able to choose off of a menu of the kind of feedback that they would want. And so by voice, that they're developing their own unique writing style, that they are able to develop style by making different writing choices, word choice, sentence structure, genre, organizational style. Yeah. Erica added, just right. You want their writing to not sound like a robot. And we do have that problem with some of our formulaic styles where we get them so kind of rooted in a particular way of reporting that we don't encourage any kind of thinking outside of those lines. Those are great ideas. And I too, what I want you to think about in this next frame is, where do you see the teacher's role? So you've got students and you've got teachers, in this case, swimming, but where do you see some of the differences? And again, you can add to the chat, you can unmute and share. That's an interesting one, Vicki, about voice in Spanish. I'm sure that
I haven't heard their voices in a year. I'm just happy they respond at all. No, but it's a good thing to do. Like, I never really think I've focused on it, and it's a great way to change something that could be boring. And just taking a different voice might make it completely easier or harder, more challenging, new vocab to write about. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, when I think about it in English, like writing a paper or something like that, you're encouraging them to explore some techniques out there. So if they read a particular author, they might try to replicate some of that. But my goodness, that would probably be a lot harder in a language that they're learning. But it would be an interesting way to get them to be creative within it, and really kind of get that vocab.
I think the higher the level, the easier it might be. But that lower level, we don't care what they say. We just try and give. Oh goodness.
It's true, and that's, I think, a common problem across the last year, is just not hearing their voices, even not, if you were virtual and not unmuting and sharing, but also even the chat feature is wonderful, but if it's just a couple of words here or there, you're really not building the depth of that discussion, and so this is something we're going to have to start all over again with. The kids have to be kind of reconditioned to, how do we talk, what protocols are we setting up, how are we going to organize this, what roles do we expect them to take, and that's something that's a conduit to writing too. If they can talk it through and think it through and have that kind of social learning moment with each other, then they can often translate that into something that they're working on individually or even collectively. So one of the things that I think about too, when I think about this graphic, so we can take, this is where I feel like we as teachers have to have some choice and voice too. You know what I mean? Like in my early teaching, structured inquiry was probably as good as it was going to get. I wanted to be right there in the pool with the kids. I didn't feel comfortable being on the side of the pool and having them go off the diving board. It wasn't where I was as a teacher. And maybe that's never where some people will be as a teacher. There's no right or wrong when it comes to this. But we can think about that, the structured inquiry, where we're really right there, where we're engaging this one class. We've got kind of, a main one topic maybe, and we're working through them learning the same thing all at once, right? And maybe then we see ourselves, a little bit less involved in the process. We have the topic, we identify some resources, but we give them some autonomy to figure it out. And then, like I said, we can get all the way to free inquiry, but that requires us to be a certain way within our own classrooms. We have to know a little bit about the different things that they might want to write about, and we have to be willing to kind of just have that, they become the guide, right? If they're the ones, if we're in complete free inquiry, they know more about a topic sometimes than we do. We have to be okay with that and let them kind of take that role as expert in the classroom. And I saw that Denise added that just that idea that, yeah, we see a change in who's doing the heavy lifting, right? The teacher or the students. And even though it looks like it's a spectrum and one end is one thing and one end is the other, it really isn't. You as a teacher have to find your own comfort level and think about, just the idea of inquiry itself, wherever you land is, I think, a good thing. Personally, like I said earlier, from my own experience, I was able to really get my students to engage in. And I did eventually make my way all the way over to free inquiry. But I found that their topics were more interesting. The things that they wanted to do with them was more interesting. And I will be honest, sometimes students, I tried when they picked a topic to give them a little bit of feedback, do a little research on my own, come up with some, what I found was this. Are you thinking this? Would you like to do this? What are your thoughts? Where do you think you might want to go with this? But some students did get stuck, even though they had picked their own topic to research. And then you have to let them kind of struggle through it. And as a teacher, that's hard, but they learned a big lesson, some of them, by struggling through, by persisting. At the end, that's what I kept saying to them. It might not be your favorite project that you ever did, but boy, you made it through it and you produced it, even when you bumped up against, a lack of ideas or a lack of research or writer's block or whatever it was. And I agree with you too, Rebecca. I do think it changes according to the topic, because I think sometimes we really need to be, my background obviously is literacy. So I think about big concepts that I want students to understand. That's going to be much more guided than, allowing them to explore. Maybe foundationally, I need to be right there as they learn the concepts. And then we move away once they've got those down. Any other thoughts on your comfort level or inquiry as a whole? So we know that Vygotsky really promoted that concept of social, learning, the social aspect of learning, I want to say. But scaffolding was part of that. That's where we as a teacher decide what we need to support our students with. And something that I honestly I don't think I learned it early enough as a teacher, was what a scaffold is really for. When you think about a building, a scaffold is there to support for a while, not forever. And oftentimes, I think in my teaching years, I left it up too long. I was a little bit afraid to pull it away. Students need that. They need that pulled away. You give them some foundational support, and then eventually you've got to back up a little bit and let them use the tools, those scaffolded tools that you gave them to make their way through whatever it is, that writing assignment, that presentation. Yeah, and Vicki added just that idea of, the less language they have, the more structured it has to be. And I think that would be the same in an ELA classroom, for example. The less they understand about maybe informational writing, for example, the more I have to really be present and really give that guidance. But once they've got some of those concepts down, now I can let them move into researching and producing something that is an informational text. So when we think about that scaffolding, we think about the question itself, guiding students in developing those open-ended questions that have multiple answers. I found it in my own practice interesting to have students conduct both primary and secondary research, to give them some tools to think about what can you find out outside of what's out there to be read about this topic? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But using models, exemplars, rubrics, something to develop the expectations, but to really give them time to draft. And then the sharing part is embedding opportunities for feedback, whether it's feedback from you or feedback from peers or both, really. I've always found it helpful that they get both, because often as teachers, we're looking at so many different student assignments, whether it's something formal, like I said, like an essay or something, even part of the scaffolded process. But so we miss things, we miss a thing here or there. Peers will be a little bit more, if it's just a one-on-one peer review, they're going to see a few things. And I always encourage students to ask, if you aren't clear about what your peer had suggested or what I've suggested, ask questions. This should be a dialogue, not just me giving you feedback and you, kind of taking it and leaving. I want it to be interactive as much as possible, because that's part of building their feedback literacy. They have to know how to read, assess, and use the feedback that we give them or that their peers give them. And finally, we want to think about ways that we can guide their revision. I feel like in the writing process, this is the one piece that we miss over and over. Maybe not miss, but don't develop it to the level it could be developed. I know from teaching older students, 9 through 12 and, early college, that often for them, revision meant going back and adjusting conventions, grammar, commas, they weren't digging deeply into what did I say? Did this reach my audience? Should I move this paragraph over here because this lays the, background for the next thing? And we can help them do that. We can help them engage in that process and set up a plan where they're revising with more intention and purpose. So I wanted to kind of think about our younger students. And this is something that a colleague and I have worked on for just, we've done it in a couple of ways, actually. We've done it for what we, have done some maker sessions. So thinking of it from, that design kind of principle, but we also did it with this summer, we called them lit labs with our incoming third grade students across the county. But we gave them opportunities to think about how to solve a problem that they encounter in a picture book. So in this particular picture book, we've got a squirrel, a bunch of squirrels actually, and a man who loves his bird feeder and all of his birds that stop by. And the squirrels are munching away. They keep eating all of the bird food. And so finally, and then he keeps changing things around, but we, to get these pesky squirrels away, but putting that back on the students, how could you create a squirrel-proof bird feeder? And think about some of those design considerations. And you can even use protocols with them, something like think, write, make, reflect. So you take them through a process to really get them to think about what will this gadget look like? How will it work? How, what would someone need to know how to build it? What aspects would you add to the design? So of course it's inquiry, right? They're thinking through how to solve a problem. And they're maybe they even have an opportunity to make this bird feeder and share it, or maybe they just design it in sketching. Maybe they design it in, as a sketch and then write about it, which is what we did often during the lit lab process. They designed something, they drew it, they sketched it out, and then they wrote about it. So their writing might have been process writing. So they described to their audience how to make it. Or it might have been descriptive writing. Sometimes we had them write it into a letter. So they would write it to, a bird feeder, manufacturer or whatever. And they would ask, please design my bird feeder. This is what it looks like. So There's a lot of different ways that you can incorporate that into a writing assignment.
This
Oops.
is a bird feeder. And
Sorry. And then when we come to some of our older kids, and this is just from an ELA perspective. So, you know, I know that I've got different disciplines in the Zoom room today, but when I think of literature, as somebody who teaches ELA, often we have a driving essential question. So if you think about, like, for example, a 9th grade textbook, there's typically a reason that these literary pieces have been grouped together. You know, so something like, what does it mean to be American? And then you've got poems, and you might have podcasts and videos and speeches and short stories, whatever those selections are, informational texts that are all, they're aimed at helping a student come up with an answer to that question. And we give them time to develop that perspective. We break it down for them, especially if the final assignment is to write something about it. We really want them to think about all these unique perspectives out here that would help them answer that question and how they're going to answer it using those, and build that textual evidence. And again, maybe even primary research. Maybe they do an interview with a family member. What does it mean to be American? And they're able to embed that into their final product as well. And I keep saying, you know, the writing, you know, I'm alluding to like an essay or a research paper, but it doesn't have to be that. We want to give students some opportunities to inform their audience in a variety of different ways. Text is very broad, but we can also think about community issues, you know, things that these are very broad, but how does your community protect its citizens? What are the benefits of community service? Those types of questions. But I've had students even funnel it down so narrowly to, should there be a stoplight on this particular corner? And they really think about the impact of the community. Maybe there's been a high number of accidents on that particular corner. So we can give them some room to be as specific as they would like to be when it comes to these types of driving questions or problems that would shape their inquiry process. What about some of you? What are some ways that what are some questions that you've posed to your students or problems you've asked them to solve in your own classrooms? Oh, playground issues. Oh, that's a great one, Danielle. Thanks for popping in. I was just about done at the end of my wait time. But yes, definitely. I had students write about even like drinking water in the drinking fountains in their school. So they investigated, you know, was it you know, okay for them to, you know, fill up their water bottles from those. Oh yeah. Yeah. Second. Yeah. The elementary is riveted on that. Christopher Columbus is a hero or a villain. I like that. Cost of water. Yeah, and the nice thing about current events is they can be part of learning about a historical event or a cultural event or a, you know, there are ways to, you know, show students. I think about, in the case of literature, how sometimes the human experience really never changes. We do the same things over and over, and we see it in the literature that we read. One thing that is great if you can do it, and this is just one idea. Oh yeah, and sorry, I'm getting a couple additional ones, but an anti-bullying movement too. Yeah, and I was thinking, one student once wrote about, for dogs, breed-specific legislation in the community. So if like, for example, pit bulls or Rottweilers weren't allowed in the community, you know, they would investigate something that bothered them. So sometimes it's, you know, school, but sometimes it's neighborhood or community. Yeah. And like I said, current events, they're a real, I mean, just such a great way to stimulate a connection, because we want whatever they're doing in the class to somehow be connected with self in the world. But this Jason threw the link in there, but the question formulation technique takes students through a process. It's a very specific process where they keep kind of going back. They kind of funnel down. They've got a set of questions and they bring it down. They've got some criteria about these questions. So as a group, they kind of move through this process together until they land on a question. So it's a great way to get them to actually generate the question instead of us always being the person who puts the questions out there and gives them what they need to solve the problem or the issue or answer the question. Another one that's also in this particular kind of category is called the think question epiphany. So you give students a little bit of time to think, and then they come up with some questions. And then as a group, they either funnel down to one question or one or two questions, or kind of an aha moment where they like, this is it. This is what we really want to work on. So you can use protocols like that to really put that questioning in to their hands. But of course, the questions should be open-ended, like we talked about before, and they should really have multiple answers, because we don't want a cookie cutter response. The whole class tells us the same thing. We want to give them enough room where these answers or these, their findings can be different. Another thing that we want to think about is this is from an article by Sarah Lupo and her colleagues, and they talk about layering text. And again, I'm coming from an ELA background, so this is, just an example, but it's easy to apply to other disciplines. But the target text would be something like To Kill a Mockingbird. But then she talks about embedding into the process visual texts, so something like a video, or even an image or an infographic, informational text, and accessible text, something that is written at a level that all students in the class can easily read. But by building text sets around a particular topic, or in this case, another text that we really want the students to delve into, we're able to give students that background, that connection to the world, connection to the issue, text to self connections. So we give them a lot of opportunities. But one thing that I really want to make sure that you understand is hers is a quad text set. It's how she labels it. But one of my colleagues says, I like the idea. I just don't want people to be stuck in quads. It doesn't have to be 4. It could be 10. It could be 2. We just want to think about how to layer text so students have a better understanding of whatever it is that we want them to ultimately use to solve the issue or the problem, answer the question, and to eventually move them to that writing opportunity. So what I want you to think about right now is just simply a unit or a lesson that you teach and how you could reframe it as a problem or a question. So maybe it's even a text. So it's something like To Kill a Mockingbird. How would you look at that particular text and think about a problem or a question that students would need to get at, and text that would support that? So how would you layer a text set for them? I just want you to take, maybe 2 minutes to just think, jot down a couple ideas, and then we'll share. I really like that idea, Erica, about including videos or picture books. I think no matter what level you teach, picture books, they're so portable. They're so, they're kind of a short, quick intro into a topic or an idea. So I think that's a great way to engage them with visual, that visual aspect. Anyone else where you've got how you could change a particular unit that you're working on now into something that's a problem or a question? And as you're jotting, I just want to share, this is just one protocol that we've used mostly throughout the pandemic. But, you know, I know there's think, pair, and share, but sometimes think, ink, and share, or think, write, and share, just a way to get students to process their thinking. It's a really great way to get them thinking about a topic when they're writing. They just have some time to process, and then maybe share it with the whole class, share it with a small group, get some feedback on it, and then they can fine tune as they move on. All right, so like I said, that primary research part, if you can, you know, beyond the text sets, if you've got an opportunity to let students do a little bit of primary research, and I always cautioned my students, it's got to be safe. I don't want you to be in a situation where, like I always had students who are like, I'm going to go to the mall and observe people all day, and I'm just going to sit in the same bench. And I'm like, you don't want to be, you don't want to be, you know, something where you're going to get yourself into any kind of you know, trouble. But they can record observations. They can create things like surveys or interview questions, and interview, you know, like I'm thinking about history. Maybe they could, if they're studying a certain time in history or an event, maybe there's people that they know, or neighbors or family members that have lived through that. So they would be able to set up that, you know, interview and ask those questions. They can do surveys, experiments even. I had a lot of students. One student wanted to have people taste test vegan chicken nuggets versus real chicken nuggets. And the surprising finding was that people didn't know the difference and actually liked the vegan chicken nuggets better, at least in her experience. So she was, you know, was collecting that data and able to embed it into what she had found. And as far as what you asked, Vicki, oftentimes, and again, I'm thinking about previous teaching experiences. We have to read the Odyssey. So we're going to read the Odyssey, and it's kind of just this isolated event. We just read it, you know, and we talk about it like you would, and we write a paper about it, maybe take a test. But if I think about something like the Odyssey, I can get students to think about maybe, you know, personal journeys, maybe obstacles that we encounter as we become who we are. You know, what types of obstacles does someone need to overcome to become, you know, self-assured, independent. So maybe then if there's a problem or a question, before we even read that, now they're thinking about it from a different lens. They're thinking about it as, you know, Odysseus is going to go through all of these different things before he makes his way back to Penelope. And what do each of those things do? How do they change him? How do they create the Odysseus that we see at the end of the poem? So it's just kind of thinking of it a little bit differently. So you give them, you know, again, a question or a problem that they're investigating through that big unit that you're doing, or that big text that you're reading, or whatever it is. So I hope that helps a little bit. Drafting, of course, you want to give them time for drafting like we talked about before, and you also want to give them time to interact around that draft. You know, embed those opportunities to share things with peers, to share things with you, and keep it as a dialogue as much as you can. We make a lot of assumptions about our feedback. We often think students get exactly what it is that we want them to do next. But until you have an opportunity to talk with them, sometimes you don't realize that they don't know where to start. They don't know which things are most important. They're not sure sometimes what you meant by what you said. And the same can be true of their interactions with peers. And like I said, that feedback process can be anywhere. We can give each other feedback when we're generating the problem or the question. We can give people feedback during the collaborative portions where they're gathering information. when they're presenting, definitely, or whatever their final piece is. And we can give them feedback, just in the reflective process. I always would ask my students, what did you feel like you did best? And if you did an assignment like this again, what are some of the things you would try to do differently? So just that few moments of metacognition makes it possible for them to transfer those skills to a similar type of situation. So the next time they're working on a research project or a problem-based unit or whatever the activity is, they think, oh, last time I did something like this, these are my strengths, and these are some things I need to address. And Jason put into the chat something I mentioned a little bit earlier, and that's that sometimes, and please feel free to copy and modify this if it's something that would work for you and your students, but it's just a little menu. So students can really say to you, I want this kind of feedback. I want you to give me, one strength and one weakness, or I want you to, when we were in the National Writing Project, some of our groups would work on feedback from the perspective of bless, address, press. So if somebody asked to have their piece blessed, it just meant, tell me the good stuff. Address means there's a certain thing they want you to address. So it might be the introduction. I really want you to address my intro. I feel like I don't have that where I want it to be. And then maybe it was press. Tell me everything I need to work on to make this better. But that gives them choice in that feedback style, that feedback process. So that's, and true, we can do the same kinds of things. What kind of feedback do we want? We can make some choices. The other thing is, where we want to get them involved in the revision process. If kids are turning things in Google, of course, we have comments, so we can talk back and forth via those comments. If they are working in Google, we also have Google Tasks or Google Keep, where we can give them itemized lists, or they can construct them even better. As they've talked to us about the feedback, they're able to click on that little pencil in a Google document and write down the tasks that they're going to work on. And as they get them done, they can check them off and they just disappear. Similarly, in Google Keep, we can give them a list of things, and the same is true in Microsoft. There's a to-do list that they can do. I oftentimes worked with a revision plan, and in that revision plan, I would have the student pick, what are your issues or concerns about this project? What's your plan for changing that or addressing that issue? And then finally, what would be the benefit of making that change in your project? So if it's a paper, for example, maybe an issue or concern is that they don't feel like they have enough research supporting their evidence. And so what I would say is, what is your plan? Maybe they're going to research more, or they're going to look for other articles that support their thinking. And the benefit would be that they've developed, in the case of like a high school student, some ethos, because they've developed their credibility by relying more on some of the experts who support their thinking. So again, that's just one way you would do it with some older kids, but you could definitely, and what I found over time too, is that if I focus it down to like 3 to 5, it doesn't become overwhelming. So what are 3 to 5 things you're going to change in your paper? You lay them out, we're going to talk about them, and then off you go. You're going to work on those. So it gives them a little bit of choice in that. And of course, to where you can get some conferencing in, whether that's one-on-one or in groups, is great too. And last but not least, we've got a lot of tools at our disposal to get them to share. We can have things like Book Creator, where we create a class book, or a student can create a book. We can have them, share their findings, obviously through any kind of a document, like a Google Doc or a Word doc. They can use things like Flipgrid, or they can create a website or slides. They can write letters to people. They can create an infographic using something like Canva. But one of the things we always talked about is that concept of the author's chair. So how are you going to let them take that spotlighted time and share their findings with the class. Or if it's not the class, who do they need to share it with? How can you create some of those authentic opportunities? So if I go back to that student who wanted to talk about breed-specific legislation for dogs, she presented it to the city council. She created, her presentation, and she was able to share it in a city council meeting. And that, I don't know if it changed anything later, but that at least got her findings out to them so that they could consider maybe changing that. All right, so I wanted to give you some time here to interact, but we have 5 minutes to go. So I am simply going to stop. I'm going to not do the timer, and we're not going to have time for breakout rooms because I was too long-winded. But I just want to give you an opportunity to share your thinking as we close up for the day. And please, just anything that you would adjust or change maybe in your current teaching that would embed inquiry in the process. So I'm going to go off of the slide completely. Actually, I'll stop sharing so I can see your faces. Those of you who I know it's a Friday. I feel so bad. It reminds me of all the people that I've worked with over the last year when their students would just, no cameras on, and you'd see every now and then a ruffled head underneath bed, a comforter come down. And so I appreciate it. And there are many, many times I've had my camera off just because I'm thinking, I'm tired today. And I'm going to put my email in there right now. But anything that you might think about or that you're already doing, just an opportunity to share your thinking with your colleagues here. I can share with you that when I first, like I said, started where I would let my students pick, completely pick, free reign, I found myself uncomfortable in that space where I didn't know, so I would sit down to talk to them about, well, how's it going? Where are you in your research process? I had like little cheat sheets almost. I had to know enough to talk to them. For example, one student wanted to write about the Internet of Things. Well, I had to go off and I went down a rabbit hole. What is the Internet of Things? What does it mean for a whole city to be wired? So, it was just a little bit of a shift in my role. So I think, just, I guess, giving yourself some grace on where you fall in this process is what I'm trying to say. It's okay to not jump in with both feet. I'm glad the feedback options help, and please, feel free to modify them as you see fit. I agree, Rebecca. I still feel like I think I'm a work in progress, 30 years into teaching. And two, I wanted to say about that student choice, you're absolutely right. Often they don't feel comfortable. They almost want us to hold their hands. So if you think of that image as something that is a stepwise process until you really are off on the side of the pool and they're in the deep end, you might have to get them there, especially some of our younger students. Well, I'm going to honor your time. And thank you. I know you didn't unmute too much and share, but I really appreciate your comments in the chat. They've been great ways to just kind of think through this approach. But I think if you do include it this year, you'll be happy with the results. I think that if you give them an opportunity to really develop an idea and take it through to wherever they need to be, like I said, it could be a presentation, it could be a written, some kind of a paper. I think the feedback that you will get from them will be rewarding to you because they will feel like we often don't do this in education, even all the way till, our master's programs. We're told kind of, this is what we're doing in this class. This is the syllabus. This is the stuff you're going to read. So we aren't really comfortable with that kind of free exploration. But when people do have the opportunity, often it's like, thanks, I really wanted to learn more about this. I just never had a chance. All right, it's 4 o'clock on the dot. And I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, just enjoy the rest of your evening.